Coming up on Bridge City News, Lethbridge and District Pro-Life is celebrating a big court victory, which says they can once again post their pro-life ads on bus benches. A GoFundMe campaign has been set up to support a Syrian family in our city who lost a family member to the novel coronavirus. And there was some sparring in Ottawa between the Conservatives and Liberals on the best way of getting the Canadian economy back on track.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. The Lethbridge and District Pro-Life Association won its court application against the City of Lethbridge. It is in connection to the city's rejection of 5 Lethbridge pro-life ads that were displayed on various bus benches throughout the city. The court said the city's decision to ban the ads was unreasonable, and rejecting the ads on the basis of inaccuracy does not line up with the right of freedom of expression. The court also said public alarm is not sufficient to tip the balance away from the protection of freedom of expression. Carol Crossan is the lawyer who represented Lethbridge and District Pro-Life, and she joins me now from Calgary. Carol, this is a big win for your client. What does this judgment actually mean?
Every individual in Canada has a right to freedom of expression, whether government deems their expression accurate or, the court said, scientifically verifiable. Every individual in Canada has the right to freedom of expression, even if their message upsets other people. And every individual has the right, even if their message is a minority view.
What is next for Lethbridge and District Pro-Life? Will the ads and the messages they convey be back on the bus benches?
Well, the normal process now, and the court outlined that, would be for the client to go back to the city and introduce its ads again, and for the city to entertain those ads, and we're expecting in a fashion that accords with the court's reasons.
That was Carol Crossan, lawyer for the Lethbridge and District Pro-Life Association. Lethbridge Mayor Chris Spearman spoke about the court win by Lethbridge and District Pro-Life earlier today. He says it is a complex and divisive issue.
The city is called to balance all sides, and sometimes it can be very difficult to get that balancing right. So we're now reviewing the decision that's been announced and determining what the next steps will be.
Lethbridge and District Pro-Life, along with the Knights of Columbus, say they're honoring grieving mothers, fathers, and their families who have experienced infant loss. And they're doing so by offering a place to commemorate these children. That place is at the Royal View Cemetery in North Lethbridge.
This particular plaque was installed in 2018, but there have been various memorials around the city in the different cemeteries. There's one in Royal View, in St. Patrick's, and now there's one in Mountain View. And this one in Mountain View has a space on it for us to put the names and dates of babies that have been lost for families, for them to mourn. We found that a lot of people thought it was very therapeutic to have a spot to go to acknowledge their grief, whether it be a miscarriage or a regretful abortion or a stillbirth, because some people don't have the opportunity to grieve or have a funeral or have just that spot to go to. But now we're going to memorialize these children in a plaque with their name and date so that they're there and people can read those names and see that they were in fact children.
If you have a child you would like to honor or acknowledge, you can always send them an email to infantmemorialldpl@gmail.com. The City of Lethbridge recorded its second COVID-19 related death this week. That brings the total number to 4 for our city since the beginning of the pandemic. According to Alberta Health, Majd Yared, a man in his 40s, not linked to continuing care or an outbreak, was diagnosed in mid-October and passed away on Tuesday. He, his wife, and 2 young daughters came to Canada from Syria for a better life. A GoFundMe page for his wife Ellen and their family has been set up and has raised over $19,000 so far. The funeral for Yared will take place tomorrow. AHS has also notified Chinook High School about a new case there of COVID-19. The City of Lethbridge currently has 159 active COVID-19 cases. There are also 27 in Lethbridge County. As for the City of Brooks, it has 36, and the City of Medicine Hat only 8 active cases. Now in the larger centres, the Edmonton zone currently has 2,312 active cases, while in the Calgary zone, 2,034. The province currently has 5,172 active novel coronavirus cases. Fortunately, 22,169 Albertans have also recovered from the virus. Alberta Health Services updated its list of COVID-19 symptoms for kids in schools and daycares. Beginning Monday, children with either runny nose or sore throat will not be told to stay home and get tested for the novel coronavirus. Our province's Chief Medical Officer of Health, Dr. Dina Henshaw, says about 700 minors who had a sore throat were tested and less than 1% had a positive result. Henshaw says the change only applies to children who've had no exposure to the virus. The government of Manitoba is forcing some businesses to close and many others to operate at a reduced capacity as COVID-19 numbers continue to rise. The restrictions are tightest in Winnipeg, where restaurants and bars are only allowed to offer delivery and takeout. Health officials say the new measures being implemented on Monday are paramount in flattening the curve.
We'll be limiting public and private group gatherings to a maximum of 5. Capacity limits of 50% in restaurants, bars, retails, museums, galleries, and libraries. Schools will be making blended learning options available for 9 to 12, and voluntary remote learning options will be available for K to 8. Reducing spectator options for sporting and recreation activities to 25% of the site's usual capacity. We're requiring contact information collection for visitors, attendees at museums, galleries, libraries, movie theaters, and concert halls.
Lethbridge is getting some international attention, and it's thanks in part to a local initiative that began as a way to help those in need during the pandemic. The City of Lethbridge teamed up with other organizations and charities wanting to serve the needy when our city experienced a shutdown earlier this year. What it grew into was recognition from the World Health Organization for World Cities Day.
So we actually had probably 50 organizations, 150 people communicating on like 22 different areas. We were dealing with just about any issue you can think of that people would face during COVID, including kids and families, schools, food security, seniors, transportation issues, disability services, addictions, homelessness, clothing, like anything you can think of that people might need help for. But moving it forward, I think that we'll be able to see that some of the people that were more on the fringes or minimized, or the people that were more vulnerable, maybe they had it a little bit better because of our collaboration. And I think that's why the World Health Organization really liked our story.
Lethbridge is the smallest city to be recognized by the WHO for World Cities Day. It is also the only Canadian city this year to receive the honor. Lethbridge has the highest crime severity index in the country. That's according to a recent report released by Stats Canada. Out of our country's 35 largest census metropolitan areas, the Windy City has the highest CSI last year. That was an increase of 2% from 2018. The next highest was Winnipeg. The index measures both the volume and seriousness of crimes reported to police. Lethbridge Deputy Police Chief Scott Wood says the headlines can oftentimes be misleading.
The term crime severity index and dangerous are not interchangeable. They're two different things, and so I think we have to be careful when we make those assumptions on that. If you look at the national averages over the last year, crime is increasing within Canada, and particularly within the prairie provinces. And one positive thing, not to suggest that it's positive overall, but is that we are below those national averages, with us only going up by 2 points versus 5 for the CSI in Canada, 7 in the violent crime index, and then 4 for being the average on the non-violent crimes.
Lethbridge remains a safe city in which to live and do business. The report shows that in 2019, we were just one of 4 municipalities that reported no homicides. Lethbridge also recorded no homicides in 2018. So we're talking about crime severity and petty crime that's associated with drugs, and the differences. Although we do see a much lower violent crime rate in Lethbridge, that doesn't diminish our concern over petty crime rates.
In total, 16,178 crimes were reported to Lethbridge Police, which has been a steady increase since 2016. Over the past couple of years, our city's population grew 1.72%, but the number of reported crimes increased 5.4%. A Coaldale man was arrested in connection with a weapons bust in Medicine Hat. Alert's Southeast Alberta Property Crime Unit seized various firearms on October 15th, including 2 sawed-off shotguns, a couple of rifles, and 2 homemade zip guns. Police say in addition to the stolen firearms, multiple stolen credit cards, license plates, and counterfeit U.S. currency was also seized. 20-year-old Ethan Weeb faces a wide range of charges, including manufacturing a firearm, unauthorized possession of a weapon, and possession of stolen property. Lethbridge Fire and Emergency Services is reminding everyone that when you roll back the clock 1 hour on Sunday, to also change the battery in your smoke detector. Fire Prevention Officer Troy Hicks says with the time change this weekend, it's a great time to not only ensure your batteries are fresh, but that old smoke detectors have not expired.
Smoke detectors have a shelf life. They do expire after 10 years. They will need to be replaced. Batteries, whether the smoke detector is going off all the time, it's just a good idea. You always want to have a fresh battery in there. So once a year, we recommend for people to change that battery. We use the time of a time change, whether in the spring going forward or the fall going back. Whatever one makes people happy and it's easier for them to remember, then we ask them to use that to remember to change their batteries.
If you're looking for more information on smoke alarms, you can always visit the Canada Safety Council website. Fort Whoop Up is hosting a Halloween spooktacular today. That means physically distanced trick-or-treating for the whole family. As Micah Quinn explains now, the fort is going all out this year.
Spooky decorations and candy have transformed Fort Whoop Up, and for 2 days, families can come down to enjoy a fun afternoon.
Yeah, we're really excited to be welcoming families to the fort today. There's a variety of activities going on. So there'll be trick-or-treating throughout the barracks in the fort. There will be wagon rides. There will be storytelling and performances, as well as treats and maybe some tricks.
Local historian Belinda Croson is sharing ghost stories on Friday.
What I love about ghost stories is they're part of our folk tales. They're part of the legends of our community, and you can believe them or not as you wish to. I mean, there's some I believe and some I don't believe. And so certainly they're about telling the stories of our community in a very different way and understanding our community in a different way. And Halloween is about getting to know ourselves, our community, and also reflecting on our ancestors. And so there's a lot more to Halloween than just the candy, and the stories remind us of that.
Actor Andrew Legg will be performing on Halloween Day at the fort, and he will introduce a new character.
Tomorrow, I'm going to be doing kind of an old-time medicine show, kind of wacky professor thing. Basically, this is a guy who's worked at the fort as sort of a cook, but not really a very good cook. And he's really excited because he's got the final ingredient, and I'm going to put this rattlesnake snoo together for the kids and do a few songs and a little bit of story, but it kind of rolls like an old time medicine show with a pretty extreme character of Professor Schnublick.
The Spooktacular event will run at Fort Whoop Up from 1 to 5 p.m. on October 30th and 31st. For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
Conservative finance critic Pierre Poilievre pushed the Liberal government for a COVID-19 economic recovery plan that does not involve going deeper in debt. Federal Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland defended her plan, saying job recovery in Canada is better than it is in the United States.
With our unemployment the highest in the G7, the 1.8 million Canadians without jobs are wondering what the economic plan is. Well, yesterday we learned that the Finance Minister's plan is debt-fueled government spending. The Bank of Canada's governor's plan is debt-fueled consumer spending. It's the credit card strategy. How to pay it all back? Well, we'll cross that bridge when it collapses. Mr. Speaker, when will this government realize Canadians want paychecks, not bigger credit card bills?
Mr. Speaker, let me start where the member opposite started, which is something that is so important to this government. Jobs for Canadians. And let me just point out to everyone in this House that the job recovery in Canada has been stronger than in the United States. TD pointed this out in a report they issued on October 20th. This is what they said. No matter how you slice the data, the Canadian labour market has been on a steadier road to recovery relative to the U.S.
U.S. Vice President Mike Pence continued down the campaign trail with a stop in Des Moines, Iowa. He told Republican supporters that the great American comeback is on.
The American economy grew by more than 33% in the third quarter, shattering any previous American record. The great American comeback is on. We cut taxes across the board for working families and small businesses. We rolled back more federal red tape than any administration in history. We fought for free and fair trade, unleashed American energy, and in 3 short years, businesses created more than 7 million good-paying jobs, including 12,000 jobs right here in the Hawkeye State.
Joe Biden, meanwhile, is campaigning in Florida. Biden is aiming to deny U.S. President Donald Trump a win in a state that is pivotal to his re-election hopes.
Millions of Americans are already voting. Millions more are going to vote by the end of this week. And I believe when you use your power, the power to vote, you're going to change the course of this country for generations to come at home and abroad. This election is the most important one you've ever voted in, whether it's your first or 10th. Over these past few months, there have been so much pain, so much suffering, so much loss. Over 225,000 dead Americans because of the negligence and the consequence of COVID. More than 16,000 here in Florida alone.
If you're in the mood to watch a movie or two this weekend, good news. There are great movies playing at the Mill once again. And with more, here's Len Benning with today's Movie Mill Minute.
Percy, a true story about a farmer played by Christopher Walken who takes on a large conglomerate whose GMOs are damaging his crops.
$1.2 million. That's how much you owe.
This is what happens when you get lawyers involved.
We're gonna lose the farm, Percy.
Get off this property. You're trespassing. He won't win.
We do not need him to win. We just need him to keep fighting. That's Grandpa.
We're going to the Supreme Court.
Is that something your lawyers have advised?
I haven't told him yet.
The Artist's Wife. Bruce Dern stars as an abstract painter whose life comes crumbling down when he is diagnosed with dementia. Now his wife must figure out how to deal with his final show.
Are you painting again? You were always such a sensitive artist. I always envied your decision to step away.
You don't see anything different?
I see something different, Richard, and it's you.
You can't paint. You never really tried.
We go back in the vaults this week for The Fast and the Furious. If fast cars is your thing, Vin Diesel and Paul Walker star in this high-octane thriller.
Great movies playing at the Mill once again. We had lots of sunshine again in southwestern Alberta today, strong winds and nice and mild. The double-digit temperatures should continue this weekend and into next week. Full weather details are coming up. A lot of snow in the city has melted thanks to those Chinook winds, and the warm weather will be sticking around just in time for the weekend. Birthday girl Jeanette Rocher is here now. Jeanette, a beautiful weekend is shaping up.
Thanks, Hal. Yeah, we should actually be seeing some decent temperatures this weekend. And did you know that Lethbridge and Raymond were actually the hot spots in Canada earlier today at 16 degrees? So we definitely got up higher than what our high was supposed to be, which was 12. So hopefully that trend will continue through the weekend into this evening. -2 is the overnight low. We could see a chance of showers after midnight and into tomorrow, Saturday. Sunshine for Halloween. 7 degrees is the high, overnight low of 2 degrees. If there's any trick-or-treaters that care to venture out in our COVID environment. Looking ahead to the 5-day forecast, that lovely trend will continue through the rest of the weekend. 17 the high for Sunday under sunny skies. Sunshine continues into Monday with a high of 19 degrees. 17 the high for Tuesday, 13 for Wednesday, and 12 for Thursday with a mix of sun and clouds. So Almanac tells us this time of year our average high should be right here, 10 degrees. So we've been getting higher than that, which has been lovely. -3 is the average low. 24 was our hot day in 1958, and our chilliest day on record for this day was -25. That was back in 2002. Sun rose this morning at 8:18 a.m. Our sun set this evening for Friday, 6:12 p.m., giving us just a little more than 10 hours of daylight. Now let's take a look at what's happening across the rest of the country into tomorrow for Saturday, October 31st. Sunshine expected in Victoria, 11 degrees, 12 the high in Vancouver with a mix of sun and cloud. Lots of sunshine across the rest of Alberta, 5 degrees expected for Calgary and Edmonton both. As we look to the rest of the prairies over in Saskatoon, -1 the high, 0 the high for Regina, and a chance of flurries expected tomorrow in Winnipeg with a high of 2 degrees. Now let's see what Saturday brings for all our friends out in central Canada. So looking to Toronto, lots of sunshine expected. 7 degrees the high, 4 in Ottawa, same thing for Montreal. Very sunny conditions in our central Canada region. It's definitely cooler temperatures though than what they were seeing last week. Now that trend is continuing into the east here. Fredericton's high, 4 degrees, lots of sunshine. Charlottetown could see a mix of rain and snow in the afternoon tomorrow. Mainly cloudy as well. 5 degrees is the high there. 5 for Halifax under sunny skies, and St. John's could see that mix of sun and snow. Snow and rain rather as well, with a high of 3 degrees for their Saturday. So there you go, that is your weather.
Economic growth in Canada slowed to 1.2% in August, but still beat expectations. Economists were anticipating a growth of only 0.9%. Stats Canada also released an early estimate for a gain of 0.7% in September, bringing total third quarter growth to around 10%. Economists say growth will cool considerably in the fourth quarter as a second coronavirus wave led to renewed restrictions. Analysts say, however, to expect modest growth overall for the last few months of 2020. Imperial Oil says its third quarter profit plummeted to $3 million. Now that is down from $424 million in the same quarter last year. The Calgary-based energy company says the profit amounted to 0 cents per diluted share. Revenue declined 32% to $5.96 billion as production dropped to an average of 365,000 barrels per day. Last year, it was 407,000 barrels. SNC-Lavalin, the company which made some scandalous headlines earlier this year, is reporting a loss of $85.1 million in its third quarter. That compares to a profit of $2.76 billion a year earlier, when its results were boosted by its sale of 10% stake in the Highway 407 toll highway in Ontario. Revenue for the quarter dropped from $2.43 to just over $2 billion. In its outlook for the fourth quarter, SNC says it expects a single low-digit decline in engineering services revenue. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was down 90 points on the day to finish at 15,580. The Dow was down 157 points to 26,501. The S&P 500 was down 40 points to 3269. And the Nasdaq was down 274 points on the day to 10,911. West Texas Intermediate Oil was down 44 cents to 35.73 US per barrel. Natural gas was up 9 cents to 3.39 US. Gold was up 11.22 to 18.7881 US an ounce, and silver was up 40 cents to 23.66 US an ounce. Wheat is at $270 per metric ton, barley's at $268, canola's at $5.39, and corn is at $272 per metric ton. Live cattle were up 33 cents to 108.30, feeder cattle were up 278 to 134.13, and lean hogs were down 5 cents to 65.58. The Canadian dollar was up slightly over the past 24 hours to 75.08 US.
Today's market numbers are brought to you by The Meat Box, your local butcher where quality matters.
Recapping one of our top stories this hour, the Lethbridge and District Pro-Life Association won its court application against the City of Lethbridge. It's in connection to the city's rejection of 5 Lethbridge pro-life ads that were displayed on various bus benches throughout the city. The court said the city's decision to ban the ads was unreasonable, and rejecting the ads on the basis of inaccuracy does not line up with the right of freedom of expression. Lethbridge Mayor Chris Spearman says the city will take some time to review the court decision. The COVID-19 pandemic has created an epidemic when it comes to anxiety and depression. Dr. Greg Jan, psychologist, has details in an interview with Jeanette Rocher momentarily. But first, here's a look what's happening in and around your community.
Here's your Bridge City News community calendar. Bikers Building Bridges is hosting their second annual Halloween drive-through trunk or treat, taking place at Exhibition Park's north parking lot on Halloween night going from 5:30 to 9 p.m. Come out for a spooky good time, decorate your vehicle, and hand out candy safely. For details about this event and to register your trunk, visit bikersbuildingbridges.com. The Juno Beach Centre is Canada's only museum in Normandy dedicated to honouring the contributions of 1.1 million men and women who served during World War II. This year, support a worthy cause and take part in the Remembrance Day races being held until November 28th. You can register for one of 3 virtual race distances, each with its own special meaning. Participants will receive a race kit that includes a commemorative medal, a Juno Beach collector coin, a bracelet, and more. For details and to register, visit junobeach.org. Bring your lunch and enjoy beautiful live music at the same time. Come out November 6th to the first Friday Lunch and Listen concert series featuring performances by the University of Lethbridge Conservatory of Music in Cass's Community Room beginning 12:15 p.m. and ending at 1. First Friday events are an initiative brought to you by the Heart of Our City Committee. For a full listing of upcoming events, visit firstfridaylethbridge.com. And that's your Bridge City News community calendar.
The COVID-19 pandemic has had an impact not only on our physical health, but also our finances and our emotional health. One of the spinoffs is an increase in domestic violence, which according to some sources has doubled during lockdown. These instances of intimate partner violence are the result of a number of factors, including stress, tight quarters, and financial trouble. In some countries like the UK, the number of calls to hotlines has increased by as much as 700%. Today's guest is Dr. Greg Jantz, a psychologist who specializes in depression, stress, and anxiety disorders at his world-renowned The Center, a place of hope in Seattle, which is one of the top facilities for treatment of depression in the U.S. Dr. Jantz joins me now via Skype from Edmonds, Washington. Dr. Jantz, welcome back to the show.
Oh, it's good to see you. Good to be here. Yeah, what an important topic we have.
Oh, you're telling me. Now, you say that these statistics should be of no surprise to anyone, and that the COVID restrictions have played a role in the increase that we're seeing in domestic violence. Maybe talk a little bit about that.
Yes, we're seeing an increase in 3 things. One, anxiety levels everywhere are at an all-time high. That's incredible. And we know that depending on where you live, even medication for anxiety is a little short supply. We also know that depression's at all-time rates. So really, we could say we have an epidemic of anxiety and depression within this pandemic. The numbers are increasing. With that is the increase in suicide and suicide attempts. Now, what we know is confinement, I'm going to say confinement, over a period of time, there's been a lot of chronic stress the last 6 months. We've seen issues such as domestic violence, abuse, emotional abuse. This is not talked about as much, but what we're seeing is it's way up as well, and we need to talk about it.
Yeah, now even before the pandemic, the rate of depression was on the rise, right? But you believe that there's a link between domestic violence and how people learn to cope under stress, right? Particularly in these times.
That's right. The stress has been chronic for over 6 months, and that chronic stress has been layered with a number of, well, uncertainties. There's been certain unrest. There's been, I call it a pandemic purgatory. People are not happy where they are. They can't go back, don't want to go back. And looking ahead, there's so many unknowns. And so anytime we have, if you will, confinement, isolation, restrictions, really oppression, we see an increase in addiction. So depending on where one lives, what we know is alcohol sales are certainly way up. Now, in certain areas, alcohol sales are up 500 to 600%. So I did a little personal experiment. I asked the checkout at a grocery store. I just said, hey, I leaned over the plexiglass. I said, "What's your number one seller right now?" And she said to me, "It's alcohol. We can't even keep it on the shelves."
Wow.
So anytime we have alcohol sales
Mhm.
up high, we're going to actually see an increase in abuse, emotional abuse, physical abuse. So anything related to abuse also goes up when there's addiction.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I know that you counsel a lot of victims of abuse, but I would imagine you counsel also people who are using violence or abuse as a coping mechanism. So, what do you tell these people? How do you turn them away from inflicting abuse and turn them towards the right coping mechanisms? And what is the right coping mechanism under the
Yeah.
circumstances we're in right now? I know it's a loaded
Well,
question.
oh, sure it is.
Uh-huh.
Well, I'll do my best. One of the things that we know, and thank you for asking, is that underlying issues need to be dealt with. So we serve folks who come in from all over, and they're here at our facility for a period of time. So we need to treat some of the underlying faulty coping mechanisms. Sometimes there's trauma. A lot of what we're seeing, though, is we're treating that underlying addiction that's been secret really for so long. And as we begin to address some of those issues, it's a lot easier to get at the core of, well, what makes a person an abuser? Where does that come from? And so often it is a person who has had some trauma in their past, and so we do look at that. We know that abuse, emotional abuse, is all about power and control. How we're going to control another person. Generally, Jeanette, people do that because they feel afraid or they feel like they're losing control. So I'm going to try to increase control.
Makes sense, right? Especially in today, what's happening today when life is
Yes.
so out of control. They need to
Yeah.
feel a sense of control.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, you've authored a book called Unmasking Emotional Abuse, and it's available at
Yes.
aplaceofhope.com. So, Dr. Jantz, can you give us just a brief snapshot of what your book
Sure.
focuses on?
Well, we hear things about sexual abuse, we hear things about physical and domestic violence, but one area we don't hear about is emotional abuse. It's the person that maybe they control you through words or through threats, or a threat of a threat. And, it's the person that has a lot of power in your life, and maybe they're give you that look and it's a threat. So it comes in various forms. So when I say unmasking, a lot of times we need to look at, well, what are the different forms that emotional abuse can be? Sometimes we think of just name calling, and it's so much more than that. So we need to have our eyes opened to what is emotional abuse, and then we can move on to, okay, now what do I do?
Can you maybe give us an example of what emotional abuse looks like, or maybe what the definition of it is?
Sure. Emotional abuse, if I was just to define it, it'd be to be treated unfairly and unjustly um, over a period of time. Now, it's not a one-time event. We all make mistakes. We might explode and we say something we regret. The healthy response is to say, "Wow, I am so sorry. Um, and would you please forgive me?" That's a healthy response. But the emotional abuser just keeps doing those things without any remorse. So one form, I was just talking to somebody the other day, and she said, one of the things that my father said to me over and over and over growing up is, "Why can't you be more like your sister? Look at her." And there was constant comparison, and that was a message. The message is, you're not good enough. Look at how great your sister is. You're not good enough. And so that message over time ends up having an effect of really being emotionally abusive because it's undermining your self-worth, your self-esteem, and it's cunning, but over time it does teach you that something must be wrong with me.
Wow. Do you think that emotional abusers realize what they're doing? And do they realize that it's hurting the victim?
There's two types, if I put two general camps. There's an emotional abuser that they're just kind of being that way because that's how they were treated. They learned it well. And so they've just continued that pattern. And with proper intervention and help, they can really learn to change that. And maybe they don't even realize how destructive they are. Then the other emotional abuser, they know. They know, and their goal is to create harm. Their goal is to create destruction and to control you. Their intent is harm. And so they know what they're doing.
That's scary. Now, yeah. Now, in your book, you say that physical and sexual abuse are always accompanied by emotional abuse. Can you explain this?
Yes. Well, what we know is if you're ever a victim of sexual abuse, you have been emotionally controlled. If you've been a victim of physical abuse and you've been hit, there's a lot of emotional abuse that's packed into that. But what we don't usually look at is that emotional abuse can stand alone. Maybe you were never physically abused, maybe you were never sexually abused, but you grew up in that environment of name calling, that environment of comparisons, that environment of put downs, and over time that was fairly abusive. So emotional abuse can stand alone. Sometimes we make excuses for it. For example, we go, oh, that's just the way he or she is. That's just the way they are. And you kind of learn to live with it, and we deny how destructive it really is.
Now, how can we uncover and confront emotional abuse?
Well, we're going to uncover it by really opening our eyes to it. And that's why in the small book, Unmasking Emotional Abuse, I actually outline here's some things to look for. And then there's a few strategies that can be helpful depending on the emotional abuser. There's times where we have to actually physically separate. It's so bad that we need to separate ourselves out away from that emotional abuse. Part of it is so we can regroup and have a plan, but also the message is this is no longer okay. And it's so easy to fall into that victim role where I'm just a victim, I allow it, and I make excuses for it. So my book is about how to empower you because you're no longer going to be the victim. Sometimes we need help. Sometimes we need somebody to stand alongside us, tell us the truth. Times we need an emotional protection, a shield of protection from all those fiery darts.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, is it possible that some people see abuse when there really isn't any?
Well, I think we can develop this hypervigilance. It's like I'm so sensitive. And if I have a lot of hurt and resentment in my life, I might misread things from people. I'm hypersensitive. And so you can take on offenses quite easily and where there was nothing ever intended. So it's the person that has been so hurt and traumatized and so full of resentment that they easily pick up an offense. It's like you can't say anything right to them. They misinterpret, and so that's where unforgiveness can take you.
Right, and it's possible that that person needs to work through some healing as well, because it sounds like
Yes,
they've been a victim in the past as well, and they're
that's
kind of
right.
carrying that into their present.
Yes.
Okay, so what are some of the impacts on an individual who is emotionally abused? And I think you just touched on one of them for sure.
Well, one effect will be they will suffer from depression. I'm living in a depressed state, so they will live in depression. The other, simply put, is they're going to live with a lot of anxiety. They're going to struggle with closeness or intimacy in relationships, not knowing who to trust or how to trust. They may feel like they're always disconnected from other people, disconnected from God. So there's a disconnect in their life. We call it attachment, where they really are having a hard time attaching.
Wow. Now, at the end of your book, you include steps to healing. So, what are some of these?
Well, I've hinted a little bit. Ultimately, there's got to be a place of forgiveness. That can seem so overwhelming. I have to move. Number one, I'm no longer going to be a victim. And I can't carry the poison of hurt and resentment in my life anymore. Yes, I was mistreated. Yes, I was abused. But I have to make a decision that I'm going to unload that toxic emotion, resentment, bitterness. And sometimes I really need some help on doing that. It's not always an instant, just happens. It's an ongoing decision. And I think sometimes forgiveness and what needs to happen is so deep that, it really requires allowing God to help us.
Right. So, what does forgiveness look like to the person who has been abused?
Well, it looks like I'm no longer going to live a life of blame. What you did to me was wrong, but I am not going to live in that bondage. I am going to be who God called me to be. I'm going to live my life with good and healthy relationships. And I have a personal mission and calling that I'm going to live out. So it changes a whole trajectory of one's life.
Yeah. So, it looks like freedom is what it
Yeah,
looks like.
absolutely.
Right. Yeah. Okay. And for somebody who is on the other side of that, say the abuser, what are some coping mechanisms that they can dive into so that they stop doing that? I mean, besides counseling, of course, which is
Sure.
very
Well, I think
important.
there does have to be accountability. There has to be, oh, such a deep desire, not only to change, but to understand that your words and actions have been damaging. And so, really, it's a development of a new empathy. I really need to have an empathy and a compassion for those who I've hurt. And that means taking responsibility. That means understanding it may be a long time before they really trust me. I need to prove myself in a whole new way. My point of focus can't be on other people. My point of focus has to be on really redemption and allowing God to work in my life and have accountability and to create change.
Thanks so much, Dr. Jans. Greg Jans is the author of Unmasking Emotional Abuse, available at aplaceofhope.com. Thanks so much for being with us today.
Good to be with you.
The Alberta government recently announced partnerships with two post-secondary institutions, Lethbridge College and the University of Lethbridge. To talk more about it is the Alberta Agriculture Minister, Devin Dreeshen. Thanks for joining us in studio today, Devin.
Well, great to be here. Thank you very much, Hal, for having me on your show.
Absolutely. Now let's talk about this big investment, $2 million for the college, $1.8 million for the U of L. Tell me more about these initiatives.
Well, it was a great partnership between the Alberta government and the college and the university here in Lethbridge, something that both colleges have an amazing research program already. And we have, within the Department of Agriculture and Forestry provincially, had researchers that essentially were duplicating work. And when we thought and came to them directly and said, if we could have our researchers go into your program at the college and the university, could you see a benefit? And it's something that, whether it's from irrigation to cattle to bee pollinators, it's something that they thought that there could be an opportunity to have more programming at their post-secondary institutions, having opportunities for researchers to be taught by new researchers being taught by our researchers, and really just whether it's programming opportunities for the college and university, as well as just more research capacity being leveraged from those two institutions. So it was really a win-win for agriculture.
And there's some jobs being created as a result too.
Yeah, we have 3 researchers directly that are being transferred over to the university. We're still working out the details on the college, but it's great to see that this research that ultimately is being led by producers, by farmers here in Alberta, they're actually setting the tone of what type of research they want to see done in the province. And it's great to see that this research continues and again has that leveraging aspect being done at the college and the university here in Lethbridge.
Now, Devin, the province also recently announced a historic $815 million investment into 8 different irrigation districts to modernize irrigation infrastructure and to increase water storage capacity throughout southern Alberta. Which districts are they, and why do you think this was so important for our region?
So yeah, last week it was historic. We had 8 out of the 13 irrigation districts in the province that actually created a consortium amongst themselves, and they signed a deal with the provincial government as well as the Canada Infrastructure Bank for $815 million. Half of that came from the Canada Infrastructure Bank. That's a loan that the districts will have to pay back, but also 20% funding from the districts, 30% grant from the provincial government to make up that $815 million. And it's tremendous irrigation in the province of Alberta. We have about 1.7 million acres currently. With this expansion, it'll be another 200,000 irrigated acres. And just the economic impact is huge. It's about $436 million annually added to Alberta's economy and GDP just with this significant investment into irrigation. And then there's the spin-off jobs, the car dealerships being able to have more economic activity. You're going to see food processors wanting to set up shop here in southern Alberta because of that reliable irrigated acres that they rely on for specialty crops, whether it's sugar beets or potatoes. So it's an overall good news story for the southern Alberta economy and the Alberta economy in general.
Many people would argue that the energy sector is the economic engine that really drives our province, and many would say our country. But the energy sector, as you know, has been struggling for quite some time, the oil and gas sector. Do you think maybe the UCP government is putting more of its focus into agriculture right now?
Well, even with this $850 million investment, there's about 8,000 jobs that will be created. So about 1,300 just on the construction side, and then almost 7,000 from indirect and direct jobs that actually result from the expansion. So that's from the farming to the food processing, everything that goes along with it. So Alberta has seen its tough times when it comes to the energy sector, but we had negative oil prices combined with COVID-19, and to see agriculture kind of ride out through all of that, with the province is expecting a bumper crop this year and strong cattle prices, it is something that it is a bright spot within the Alberta economy.
Moving forward, Devin, what kind of support do you potentially see down the road, for the grain sector and as well for our beef and hog producers?
Well, it's something that we've, early on in 2019, last year, we made an initiative, a $1.4 billion private investment target. So we've been very focused at agriculture and forestry to try to do the right things to attract, whether it's foreign investment, Canadian investment, provincial investment to the province, to actually have more value-added products developed here in Alberta. So that helps out farmers because they have another buyer of their produce, as well as a job creation, because you're actually going to have people in the food processing sector making more products, and rather than shipping it out on a train to go on a boat, you're actually doing that value added here in the province. So that's something that we're well on the way to hit that target of $1.4 billion in private investment. We saw it here in Lethbridge last year of a $300 million expansion of Cavendish. We've been talking to them for the potato processors to be able to try to do more, to double that footprint. So we are working with food processors to attract investment here in the province and let them do what they do best, which is create high quality food.
China still will not accept Canadian canola from our farmers here. A lot of it's tied in, many people would argue, with Canada detaining Huawei executive Meng Wanzhou. Ever since then, it's like, no, we're not going to accept the Canadian canola. How much has that been a problem? How much has that hurt our canola producers?
Well, it's a billions of dollars of market access loss due to what China did, but it is something that really gave, I think, a shock to the industry to realize that it's good for them to be able to shop around, to make sure that they have other trading partners around the world. And the industry essentially did it for the last couple of years. So that is nice to see that they are directing sales to other areas. It obviously has a depressing price if there's a large market that is you're not going to be able to sell to. But overall, it's something that it did hurt Canadian farmers. But at the end of the day, it's something that we had to live with. And again, we're seeing grain companies in Canada find, international trade is like water. It finds a way. And it's great to see that at least canola prices now are relatively stable in Canada.
So let's talk about some of those other markets, Devin, instead of putting all of our eggs, pardon the pun, into two baskets, China and the United States. Where else is Canada looking to? Which other countries?
Well, it's actually, again, part of our economic relaunch and our Alberta's recovery strategy, especially focusing on agriculture, is we're doubling our international trade offices. So we obviously are focusing on the U.S. because they're our one and only neighbor. They're a huge consumer of what we have here in the province and what we produce, but also looking at Mexico, also Singapore as a major hub in the Southeast Asia market, because it's a growing area. They always want a high demand for their growing middle class of higher quality food, of higher protein. And so that is something that we produce, high quality food with clean air, clean land, and clean water. And that's something that sells internationally extremely well. And so we want to make sure that we can go out and promote our agriculture products around the world to every country, but to the leading major ones right now. And that's why we doubled our international footprint with our agriculture trade officers.
How much do you think COVID-19 has really impacted our farmers and ranchers?
Well, it was something early on. We asked the federal government to deem agriculture as an essential service. We did it, I think we were the first province to actually do it when COVID hit, because of the fact that everybody needs to eat. And it's something that we want to make sure that the supply chain of whether it's grain on trains getting to market, or even inputs coming into the province, whether it be fertilizer or medication for livestock, we want to make sure that those supply chains were not disrupted. And so it is something that the federal government did finally deem it an essential service so that there wouldn't be any disruption in international flow. But it's something that I had a lot of farmers, especially in seeding, that would call and say, well, self-isolating is pretty easy because I'm in a tractor cab miles away from anybody else. So overall, I think when you look at agriculture compared to other industries, it fared relatively well due to COVID-19 this year.
I've been talking to some farmers as well here in southwestern Alberta. They're still irate about the carbon tax. They're saying, you know what, I have to dry my grains and this is really killing my business right now. What are you hearing from farmers? And especially now that Trudeau Liberals are talking about another carbon tax on top of the current one.
Yeah, the carbon tax obviously had a terrible impact to farmers because they are a large user of energy, whether it's from heating barns or drying grain or operating equipment. But yes, as you point out, the clean fuel standards, it could be even worse than the carbon tax. So we are fighting the carbon tax at the Supreme Court. We wanted the Alberta Court of Appeals to 4-1 decision that the federal carbon tax was unconstitutional. So the musing of this clean fuel standards has the possibility of being even worse. So we are looking at it as a provincial standpoint of let's truly understand what the actual cost would be, B, push and nudge the federal government as much as we can to say that this is something that doesn't make sense, especially in our agriculture sector. It's so heavily trade dependent. We do compete internationally, and to have trade exposed industries like agriculture have to pay another huge carbon tax, it really just hurts our competitiveness and the bottom line of our industry. So the clean fuel standard has so much negative consequences if it were to be implemented, and it's something that I'm pretty sure as the province of Alberta we'd be fighting against.
What kind of support is Ottawa really giving the Alberta agriculture sector here? And, recently, Seamus O'Regan, Minister, mentioned the $60 million to fight pine beetles here in Alberta. So that really helps. So is there a stronger connection as opposed to Ottawa and the energy sector?
Well, giving credit where credit's due, Minister O'Regan, I met with him when Premier Kenney led a delegation down to Ottawa, and that was the very first thing I brought up was the mountain pine beetle. The federal government gave, I think it was $75 million over 3 years to the maritime provinces to fight to their equivalent of the mountain pine beetle in those provinces that was going around provincial borders. I made the case that the mountain pine beetle originated in British Columbia, spread over, wasn't managed properly, spread over into Alberta. We actually have the Saskatchewan government giving us $1 million a year to fight the mountain pine beetle in Alberta so it doesn't spread into Saskatchewan along the boreal forest. So my argument to Minister O'Regan was this is a national issue and there should be federal funds coming. And a year plus later, he did deliver. So $60 million over 3 years is coming from the federal government, and that'll be on top of what the province spends every year to fight the mountain pine beetle. And since 2004-06, I believe, we've spent over $500 million combating this disease or this pest that ultimately threatens about $11 billion worth of pine trees in the province of Alberta. So
That's quite a bit, yeah.
It's something that we have to do everything we can to try to mitigate it. And again, I did publicly thank Minister O'Regan for helping Alberta in this national fight.
Now, you're a farmer yourself. You farm out in central Alberta, outside of Innisfail. And did you have a bit of a bumper crop this year?
Yeah, the barley was fantastic. Wheat was kind of normal. Canola wasn't as good as we were hoping for. But again, it's interesting to look at the crop reports from across the province. And in the southern parts, I think every crop was near a bumper if you could dodge the hail. Central Alberta was kind of a mixed reading. But there was a band north of Edmonton that really just had excess moisture the entire year, a lot of unseeded acres. And the Agriculture Financial Services Corporation, AFSC, their latest report is about 9-10% higher than the 10-year average. So an amazing overall crop coming out of Alberta, something that the CP and CN, our rail lines and the grain companies are trying to wrestle with. How can we actually make sure we can get this crop out to market?
If not, we need bigger silos, right, to store all of these
crops.
Well,
and on-farm storage is obviously an issue. And it's something that but it's not a good news story overall throughout the province. There are some areas, again, that band north of Edmonton, that they've had about 4 or 5 really bad years of just excess moisture. So although overall it could be a record crop this year, which is fantastic for the province, there are still pockets where it wasn't a good year. And that's something that the latest estimate that I saw was almost $500 million going out in crop insurance payments to those very wet areas of the province. So overall, a great ag news story, but there are some problem areas. But again, that's why we have crop insurance here in the province.
What are some of the issues moving forward that a lot of our farmers and ranchers will face outside of COVID-19, the pandemic, outside of the carbon tax, and lack of moisture or too much moisture?
Well, weather is always going to be a difficult issue, but I think so many farmers, they view red tape and just too much government interference as something that really holds them back. So whether it is a clean fuel standards or new regulations coming down on them, they're always fighting on the margins. And when they always get added government, so many farmers just say, just do no harm, just leave us alone as a government. So that's something that we, from a provincial standpoint, do everything we can to just set the playing field for our farmers and ranchers and let them compete on a global scale, because they have the knowledge, they have the know-how, and they can compete and do a fantastic job. Alberta beef is world-renowned. Our high-quality grains that we produce here and ship around the world, usually we import it back when it's been processed in other areas. But overall, agriculture is so resilient and strong. It's always been woven into the fabric of Alberta. And it's something that I think modern agriculture, especially with the research announcements that we made today, it's something that it always has to be cutting edge and leading the pack, because if you don't, you end up getting swamped. So agriculture is a real good bright spot for the province.
Alberta Agriculture Minister Devin Durishan, congrats on the bumper crop, and thanks for joining me in studio today.
Well, thank you so much, Hal. I really appreciate it.
On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless, and thanks so much for watching.